The moment Caroline Hurst's wagon wheel cracked clean in half on the sun-baked main road into Dusthaven, Texas, in the spring of 1878, she knew the universe had a cruel sense of humor, but she had no idea it was also capable of something far more unexpected. She sat on the buckboard and stared at the tilted world around her, the wagon listing hard to the right like a wounded animal laying itself down. Dust still hung in the air from the impact, golden and thick in the late afternoon light. The town of Dusthaven spread out before her in a loose arrangement of timber-framed buildings, a water trough, two saloons facing each other across the main street like old rivals, and a handful of people who had stopped to look. She was not the kind of woman who enjoyed being looked at by strangers. Caroline was 26 years old. With dark auburn hair she kept pinned beneath a wide-brimmed traveling hat, and eyes the color of a river in winter gray-green, clear and rarely still. She had been traveling alone since Fort Worth, which would have been a scandal to most people, but Caroline was not most people. She had come from Richmond, Virginia, with a purpose. She was headed to Santa Fe, New Mexico territory, where her late father's law partner had left her a small but livable property in his will. A house, land, a beginning. She had planned everything with precision. 3 days in Dusthaven to rest, resupply, and find a reliable westbound trail guide. Then onward. Now her rear right wheel was in 2 pieces in the dirt, and the axle was making a sound that suggested it might not be far behind. She climbed down from the buckboard with as much dignity as a woman could manage when her only means of forward travel had just collapsed, and she put her hands on her hips and assessed the damage with the same cool expression she used when courtroom witnesses lied directly to her father's face. "Bad luck, that," said a voice. She turned. A man was standing a few feet away, not quite close enough to be presumptuous, but close enough that he had clearly walked toward her rather than happened past. He was tall, somewhere in his early 30s, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of working outdoors rather than from hardship. Dark hair with a touch of dust in it. A jaw that looked like it had been carved and then forgotten in the sun. He wore a plain cotton shirt, work trousers, and boots that had seen real use. No gun belt. That was the first thing Caroline noticed, no gun belt. In 1878 Texas, that was unusual enough to register. Catastrophic luck, she corrected, because precision mattered to her. "Aaron Wilcox," he said, and offered his hand without ceremony. She shook it because he had offered it like a man who had no particular agenda, which was rarer than the lack of a gun belt. "Caroline Hurst. You heading through or stopping?" he asked. He was looking at the wheel, not at her, which she also noticed. "Through," she said. 3 days at most. I need the wheel repaired and supplies restocked, then I'm on to Santa Fe." He nodded slowly, still studying the wheel with the focused look of a man who understood broken things. He crouched down and ran his hand along the cracked spokes, checking the hub, checking the axle. He frowned slightly at something he found there, but did not say anything alarming about it. He stood back up. "Hector Baines is your man," he said. "Wheelwright, just down from the feed store. He does good work. I can take you over if you want." "I can find it myself," she said. "I imagine you can," Aaron said, and there was nothing challenging in his tone, just a simple agreement that struck her as oddly refreshing. "Good evening to you, Miss Hurst." He walked away. She watched him go for 2 full seconds before she redirected her attention to finding the wheelwright. Hector Baines turned out to be a round-faced man in his 50s who chewed tobacco and spoke in short declarative sentences. He looked at the wheel for considerably less time than Aaron Wilcox had and then said, 2 days. "Maybe 3. I need it in 1, Caroline said. Hector sucked his teeth. "Spokes are cracked in 4 places, hub needs rebuilding, axles bruised, 2 days, maybe 3. Caroline stared at him. He did not move. She revised her 3-day timeline in her head and accepted the reality, because she was a practical woman. She found the town's single boarding house run by a Mrs. Edna Pryor, a brisk woman in her 50s who smelled of lavender and seemed mildly disappointed that Caroline had arrived without a husband. The room was clean, and the mattress was not terrible, and the window overlooked the main street, which meant Caroline could lie in bed and catalog the sounds of Dusthaven while she planned her next moves. She needed a trail guide. She needed to replenish her water barrels. She needed to purchase a new rope and a second set of tack for her horse, Blythe, because the current set was wearing thin. She had a list. Lists made the world manageable. She saw Aaron Wilcox the next morning. She was at the general store, working through her supply list with methodical efficiency, when he came in for something that turned out to be a tin of axle grease and a coil of rope. He noticed her at the counter, gave a brief nod, and went to find what he needed. She noticed that he was buying good rope, the same thick braided kind she was looking for. She also noticed that he bought it without negotiating on the price, which told her he either earned well or didn't care much about money. "Are you from here?" she asked, when their proximity at the counter made further silence feel more deliberate than it was worth. "Been here about 4 years," he said. "Before that, Missouri, before that, Virginia." She looked up from her list. "Virginia. Richmond, specifically," he said. She set her pencil down. "I'm from Richmond." He looked at her then with a kind of careful attention that wasn't intrusive but was entirely real. "Small world out here," he said. "What do you do in Dusthaven?" she asked. "I run the livery stable," he said. "And a small ranch south of town. 12 head of cattle, some horses, nothing spectacular." "No gun belt," she said, because it had been sitting in the back of her mind. He glanced down at his hip as if reminding himself of its emptiness. "I carry one when I need to, don't see the use in wearing it around town like a decoration." He paused. "Your horse is stabled at my livery, brown mare, white star on the forehead." "That's Blythe," Caroline said. "I put her in the corner stall this morning because she was getting skittish near the other horses. She seemed to settle better with the space. I hope that's all right." Caroline looked at him for a moment. He had noticed her horse's temperament and adjusted accordingly, without being asked, without fanfare. "That's very considerate," she said, with more sincerity than she had intended. He paid for his rope and axle grease and tipped his hat an uncomplicated gesture and left. She finished her supply list and found that she had spent more time thinking about Aaron Wilcox than was probably rational. The next morning she sought out a trail guide, which was her most pressing and genuinely difficult problem. She had asked around the boarding house and the general store and been pointed toward 3 different men. The first was drunk before noon. The second, when she explained she was traveling alone, informed her that he did not take single women on the trail because it was impractical. She thanked him with deliberate politeness and crossed him off her list. The third was a man named Dale Cotter who seemed capable enough, but when she mentioned Santa Fe, he told her that the route she'd mapped through the canyon passes west of the Pecos River was currently impassable. "Washout," he said. "Big rains 2 weeks back. Whole section of trail gone. You need to go 60 miles south to get around it." This was a problem. Not only because it added distance, but because the southern route passed through territory where there had been ongoing disputes between ranchers and Apache bands. Disputes that, in Caroline's understanding of the political situation, had been driven largely by land seizures and broken treaty obligations. She was not afraid of the land itself, but traveling through active conflict zones without knowledge of the local situation was genuinely dangerous. She would need a guide who knew the territory, knew the people, and could navigate those realities. She asked Dale Cotter if he knew such a guide. He scratched his chin and told her he'd have to think on it. She walked back toward the boarding house feeling the first real edge of frustration. 1 day in Dusthaven had become 2. The wheel would be ready tomorrow, Hector Baines had said. But without a trail guide, a ready wheel didn't do her much good. She stopped at the livery to check on Blythe, because when the world was difficult, horses were frequently better company than people. Aaron Wilcox was in the stable yard, working on a fence post that had come loose. He was doing it with the same unhurried competence he seemed to bring to everything, driving the post home with a wooden mallet, checking its alignment, driving it again. He saw her come in and straightened up. "She ate well this morning," he said, meaning Blythe. "Good," Caroline said. She went to the corner stall and let Blythe press her nose into her palm. The mare smelled like hay and warm leather and horse, which was deeply comforting. "You look like you've had a difficult morning," Aaron said. He wasn't prying. He said it in the same tone he might have said that the weather was looking changeable. "My trail guide situation is complicated," she said. She was not sure why she told him that. She didn't generally discuss her difficulties with people she'd met 3 days ago. "The Pico's washout," he said. She turned to look at him. "You know about it?" "It's been the talk of the territory for 2 weeks. Everyone trying to get west has had to reroute." He set down the mallet and leaned against the fence post. "South route is tricky right now. The situation between the ranchers and the Apache bands out of the Sacramento Mountains, it's complicated. Mostly the ranchers pushing too hard on land that isn't theirs. The Apache have been there a long time and they don't need to explain themselves to anyone, but it makes the trail politically uncertain." "Do you know someone who could navigate that?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. He had very direct eyes, brown, warm, attentive in a way that didn't feel like scrutiny. "I know the southern route well," he said. "I've made that run twice, the summer before last and again in the fall. I have a good relationship with the Mescalero Apache who work that territory mostly through trade. Their situation is a genuine injustice. What's been done to them by Washington and by the cattle companies is something that should embarrass every honest person in this country. But they are practical people and they have no quarrel with travelers who show them basic respect." He paused. "If you needed a guide, I'd be qualified to do it. You have a ranch," she said, "a livery stable. Both can be managed for a few weeks," he said. "I have a hand named Pete who runs things well when I'm away." Caroline looked at him very carefully. In her experience, men who offered things freely usually had conditions. She had learned this from watching her father work in law for 20 years. Generosity with unstated price tags was one of the oldest human tricks. "Why would you do that?" she asked directly. He seemed to appreciate the directness. He thought about it for a moment without deflecting. "Partly because you seem like someone who has organized every piece of this journey and watched it get disrupted through no fault of your own," he said. "Partly because I haven't had a reason to travel west in a while and Pete's been telling me for 2 months I need to stop hovering over his work. And partly because I'd rather know you got where you were going safely than wonder about it after you're gone." She considered him for a long moment. The mare breathed warm air over her hand. "We would need to establish terms," she said. "Of course," he said. "I pay my own way. I don't need looking after, I need someone who knows the land. I make my own decisions on the trail. If I decide to stop, we stop. If I decide to push on, we push on." "That seems fair," he said, "and you would expect nothing from me in return except basic civil conduct." "That's all I'd want from anyone," he said. He said it simply, without any visible affront, and she believed him. "The wheel won't be ready until tomorrow," she said. "I'll give you my answer by tonight." She spent the afternoon thinking it through with the same rigor she would have applied to any decision her father had ever brought to her for a second opinion. The man was a stranger, but a 3-day acquaintance in a small town was a different kind of stranger than a random man on a road. She had observed him. No unnecessary weapons, consistently considerate to animals, honest about why he was offering help, knowledgeable about the political realities of the southern route in a way that suggested genuine engagement rather than surface familiarity. He was from Richmond. She could verify his character, at least partially, through the people of Dusthaven who clearly knew him. She asked Mrs. Pryor about Aaron Wilcox. The older woman's expression shifted into something warm and slightly amused. "Aaron, good man, came here 4 years ago with nothing but a horse and enough money to lease the stable building. Built it up himself, honest to a fault. Helped the Mescalero family that got stranded here 2 winters back, fed them and gave them shelter without making any kind of fuss about it. Never starts trouble, finishes it occasionally but never starts it." She gave Caroline a measuring look. "Why are you asking?" "He offered to guide me west," Caroline said. Mrs. Pryor nodded as if this made complete sense. "Then you'll be fine." That evening, Caroline knocked on the door of the livery stable office where a lamp was burning. Aaron opened it. He had been going over some kind of ledger. Behind him, the office was small and tidy with a single shelf of books. She noticed a volume of Thoreau and one of Lincoln's speeches, and a map of the territory pinned to the wall. "I accept your offer," she said. "We leave the morning after the wheel is repaired." "All right," he said. No triumph, no performance, just all right. She turned to go and then stopped. "For what it's worth," she said. "A man who has Lincoln's speeches on his shelf and understands why the Apache situation is an injustice rather than an inconvenience is a man I'm inclined to trust." She didn't look back to see his expression, but she heard, very quietly, something that might have been a surprised exhale, not quite a laugh, but something close to it. The wheel was ready at noon the next day, and Hector Baines had done good work. The spokes were solid and the hub was true, and the axle had been checked and cleared. Caroline paid him, thanked him without warmth but with sincerity, and drove the wagon to the livery yard where Aaron was already loading supplies with efficient purpose. She watched him for a moment before he noticed her. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had been working with his hands most of his life, not performing for anyone, just doing the thing. He had his wagon loaded too, a second horse, a solid bay gelding named Clark, and basic trail supplies. He had not overpacked. She appreciated that. "I took the liberty of checking your water barrels," he said when he saw her. "The second one had a small crack near the base. I've replaced it. I'll add it to the trail costs." She opened her mouth to say something about him acting without asking first, and then closed it again. A cracked water barrel in the desert stretch south of the Pecos River would have been the kind of problem that didn't announce itself until it was catastrophic. She appreciated the fix even if she would have preferred to be consulted. "Thank you," she said instead. "But in the future, please tell me before you make changes to my equipment." "Fair enough," he said, without argument. They left Dusthaven the following morning at first light. The town was barely awake, just the smell of wood fires starting up, a dog trotting across the main road, one of the saloon owners sweeping his front step with the practiced rhythm of long habit. Caroline drove her wagon and Aaron rode Clark alongside, and for the first several miles they did not speak much. The Texas plains in early morning were extraordinary, the light coming in low and golden over grass that moved in slow waves, hawks circling in the distance, the sky an impossible blue that deepened as the sun rose. "It doesn't look like this in Richmond," Caroline said, because the beauty of it came out of her before she had decided to speak. "No," Aaron agreed. "Richmond is beautiful in its own way, but this is something else. Do you miss it, Virginia?" He considered this seriously, which she had come to expect from him. He did not give quick answers to real questions. "I miss certain things," he said. "The green of the Blue Ridge in spring, good coffee, the smell of the James River in summer." He paused. "But I don't miss the way people there looked at each other. Everyone always calculating what the other person was worth to them socially, financially. It was exhausting." "My father was a lawyer," she said. "I grew up around a lot of that calculating." "What was he like?" "Brilliant," she said, immediately and without hesitation, "and very kind in private. Less kind in public because public kindness was something other men used against him. He taught me to observe people before I trusted them." She paused. "He died 2 years ago. Influenza." "I'm sorry," Aaron said, and it came out plain and genuine and not at all like a social nicety. "He left me very little money," she said, because she had made peace with this fact and there was no shame in it. "His law partner, a man named Elias Fender, had more affection for my father than most people realized. He left me his house in Santa Fe in his will. I've never seen it. I'm going based on a letter and a deed." "That takes a particular kind of courage," Aaron said. "Going toward something you've never seen. It takes a particular kind of necessity," she said. "Courage is a more romantic word for it than it deserves." He looked at her then briefly, with something shifting in his expression that she chose not to analyze too closely. The first week of the trail was steady and uneventful in the best sense, not empty of interest, but free of crises. They fell into a rhythm that surprised Caroline with its ease. She drove the wagon and he ranged ahead or alongside, checking the trail, reading the land with the practiced instinct of someone who had spent years in it. They ate meals together beside the fire. He was a better cook than she expected, and she told him so directly. He told her she had very high standards for trail cooking, and she agreed that she did. She discovered, across those first days of travel, that he was a man with a genuine inner life. He had been reading seriously since childhood, had strong opinions about the moral failures of the federal government in its handling of native land rights, had once considered studying law before life had redirected him. He had never been married. He was 32 years old. She told him she had never been engaged, which for a woman of 26 in 1878 was considered unusual enough that she typically avoided the subject. "Were you expected to be?" he asked. "Constantly," she said. "My mother's entire framework for understanding me was as a person who would eventually belong to someone else. My father understood me better." "What did you do in Richmond?" he asked. "I worked in my father's office," she said. "As his unofficial secretary and research assistant, I read case law, I wrote briefs. I was better at the work than most of his paying clerks, and I was paid nothing because I was his daughter." She said this without bitterness. It was simply a fact she had organized and filed. "When he died and the office was dissolved, I had no formal credentials and no income. So Santa Fe." "You should have been a lawyer," he said. "Yes," she agreed, completely without vanity. "I should have been." There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable. The fire crackled. Above them the stars were overwhelming. The Texas sky at night was a different order of magnitude from anything the eastern seaboard offered. "What made you stay in Dusthaven?" she asked. "You could have built a livery anywhere." "I came through heading further west," he said. "There was a family, a homesteader, his wife, 3 children. Their wagon had broken down about 2 miles from town. Not just the wheel, the whole front axle had sheared. The man was in a panic. The wife was holding the youngest child who had a fever. It was July, so the heat was serious." He looked into the fire. "I spent 2 days helping them get the wagon fixed and get the family into town. By the time that was done, I'd eaten at 3 different people's tables and talked to half the town, and someone mentioned that the old livery had been empty for a year." He shrugged. "It just felt like where I was supposed to be." She looked at him across the fire. In the dancing light, his face was all angles and quiet warmth, and she became suddenly and uncomfortably aware that she had not thought about Santa Fe in several hours, which was unusual. She excused herself and went to bed, which was the wagon bed, screened by a canvas curtain, while he rolled out a blanket beside the fire. This arrangement had been settled on the first night without awkwardness. She lay on her back and listened to the immense silence of the plains, punctuated by cricket song and a distant coyote, and thought about a man who had stopped to help a family he didn't know and ended up building a life around that moment of stopping. On the 4th day of travel, they crossed into New Mexico territory, which Aaron marked with no ceremony, but which Caroline noted with a feeling she recognized as something bordering on thrill. New land, new air. The geography shifted from wide Texas grass to something more austere, and arresting red rock formations beginning to emerge in the distance, the land becoming more sculptural, more serious. And then on the 5th day they hit the first real problem. It was a river crossing. The rains that had taken out the northern pass had also swelled the secondary creek that cut across their southern route, and what should have been a shallow ford was now running fast and brown and deep. It wasn't impassable, but it was dangerous for a loaded wagon. Aaron sat on Clark at the bank and studied it for a long time. "We can unload the wagon," he said. "Take the supplies across by horse in multiple trips, then bring the wagon through empty. It'll take most of the afternoon." "Can the wagon take it loaded?" she asked. "The current's unpredictable," he said. "If the wagon gets pushed offline, you'd lose the left wheel to that rock shelf. I don't want to risk it." "All right," she said. "Let's unload." It took 4 hours. They worked together steadily, moving crates and supply sacks and water barrels across by horse, Caroline riding blithe on the shorter crossings and Aaron making the deeper runs on Clark, who was a stoic and powerful animal with excellent footing. When everything was across, Aaron brought the wagon through himself, driving it with precise control, and Caroline stood on the far bank and watched with her hands clasped in front of her, feeling the specific tension of watching something she needed very much navigate something dangerous. The wagon made it. When Aaron brought it up the far bank and stopped and set the brake, she felt herself release a breath she had been holding for approximately 4 minutes. "Good," she said. "Good," he agreed. He was wet from the knees down and looked undisturbed by this. They reloaded everything and made camp just beyond the crossing because the afternoon was nearly gone and the work had been exhausting. That night Caroline made the coffee because he had done the cooking, and she made it well, and he said so. "My father's one domestic insistence," she said. "Good coffee." He said a man who tolerated bad coffee had given up on himself. Aaron laughed, a real laugh, warm and sudden, and Caroline found herself smiling in a way she couldn't quite organize before it had already happened on her face. "I think I would have liked your father," he said. "He would have liked you," she said, and then felt the weight of what she had said settle between them like something dropped carefully. He looked at her. The fire was low and gold between them. The night air was cool in the way New Mexico nights were cool, a clean, dry coolness that came down from the mountains like a gift. "Why?" he asked, and his voice was quiet. "Because you don't perform," she said. He was surrounded his whole life by men who performed at being honorable, and you just do the thing. Without announcement, she paused. He found performative men exhausting. "So did I," Aaron said. "So do I." She got up and went to bed and lay very still and thought about the careful, quiet way he said those words, and how they felt like a door opening in a house she hadn't known she was standing outside of. 3 days later, they reached the territory where the trail became politically complicated. It was early morning when they were stopped. 3 men on horseback, appearing from behind a rock formation, with the relaxed inevitability of people who had been watching the trail for a while. They were not Apache, they were white men, rough-dressed, with the air of people who had decided the land around them was theirs by virtue of having a gun. "Where are you headed?" said the one in front. He was addressing Aaron rather than Caroline, which Caroline found immediately irritating. "Santa Fe," Aaron said. "Trail passage." "This is Croft land," the man said. "You want to cross, there's a toll." "This is public territory under federal land grant," Aaron said with absolute calmness. "The Croft family's lease doesn't include the trail corridor." The man's eyes narrowed. "You seem real sure about that." "I am," Aaron said. "I've seen the survey papers." A silence stretched. Caroline kept her expression neutral, her hands loose on the reins, and she watched Aaron with a focused attention she wasn't entirely able to keep clinical. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't backing down either. He was just stating facts with the unruffled certainty of someone who had done the relevant homework. The lead man looked at Caroline. She met his gaze directly and held it. The 3 men exchanged a look. The math was 2 people who knew their legal standing against 3 men with guns, and the 3 men with guns apparently decided that math was more complicated than it seemed. The lead man turned his horse aside with an expression designed to look like it was his choice. "Move on then," he said. They moved on. When the 3 men were out of sight, Caroline let out a slow breath and said, "You've seen the survey papers." "I read every survey document I could find about this route before we left," he said. She stared at him. "When?" "The evening before we left. I borrowed the territorial survey records from the county office. Mrs. Pryor let me read them at her kitchen table until about midnight." "You knew this crossing was potentially contested, and you prepared for it without telling me," she said. "I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily," he said. "If the situation hadn't arisen, there was nothing to worry about." "Aaron," she said, and something in the way she used his first name, the tone of it, the direct weight of it made him look at her carefully. "I appreciate what you just did. I appreciate that you prepared. But please understand that I am not a person who is made more comfortable by being protected from information. I'm made more comfortable by having the information." He absorbed this without defensiveness. He nodded. "You're right," he said. "I'll remember that." and she believed he would. That was the extraordinary thing about him. He listened to correction as if it were valuable rather than threatening. They made camp that night against a red rock wall that held the day's warmth long after dark. The stars above New Mexico were a different configuration from the Texas stars, and Caroline lay on her back with her bedroll spread on the flat ground and counted the ones she could identify, which was more than most people would have expected from a woman from Richmond. "Do you know Orion?" She called to where Aaron was banking the fire for the night. "Finding it now," he said. A pause. "Got it. My father taught me that constellation first," she said. "He used to take me out to the back garden at night and we'd stand there in the cold identifying stars. My mother thought it was eccentric." "Was she wrong?" he asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice even across the distance. "Entirely," she said. He came and sat beside her on the ground, not on her bedroll but close enough to look up at the same angle of sky. She was aware of the warmth of him in the cool night air. She was aware of it in a way that she had been increasingly aware of things like that over the past week, and was increasingly unable to pretend she was simply cataloging data. "What will you do with the house in Santa Fe?" he asked. "Live in it," she said. "Figure out what comes next. I have enough money saved to hold for 6 months. After that, I need to find work. There's a growing community of lawyers in Santa Fe, and I'm hoping one of them will need a research clerk who actually knows what she's doing." "They'd be lucky to have you," he said. "They would," she agreed, "but luck and recognition are not the same thing, and I'm prepared for that distinction." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if Santa Fe isn't what you pictured?" "Then I'll adapt," she said. "I've always adapted. It's perhaps my primary skill." "You have a lot of skills," he said. "So do you," she said. Another silence. The kind that wasn't empty. The kind that was full of things that hadn't been said yet, waited and patient, waiting for its moment. "Caroline," he said, and something in the way he said her name, careful, like he was handling something he didn't want to damage, made her turn her head to look at him. He was already looking at her. In the starlight, his face was serious and open in a way she had seen glimpses of before, but never quite this bare. "I want you to know that none of the things I've done on this trail, the water barrel, the survey papers, unloading the wagon, none of it was about doubting your capability," he said. "I hope you know that." "I do know that," she said. "That's why I'm still here having this conversation." "I'm glad you are," he said, and the simplicity of it was devastating in a way she had not anticipated. She turned her eyes back to the sky. Her heart was doing something she didn't have a clinical category for. She breathed the cool night air in and held it. "Aaron," she said. "Yes. I think you should know that I am a person who does not say things she does not mean." "I've noticed that," he said. "Good," she said. "Then when I tell you that this past week has been, unexpectedly, the least alone I have felt in 2 years, you'll understand that I mean that precisely." She heard him breathe in, a slow breath. "That means a great deal to me," he said, quietly, thoroughly. They stayed there under the stars for another hour, talking about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. And the fire burned low, and the night deepened around them. And Caroline thought about how the most significant things in her life had always arrived without warning and without ceremony. Like a wheel breaking on a dusty road into a town she had never planned to think about again. The following morning brought the second significant problem of the journey, and this one was more serious than contested land. Blythe came up lame. It happened on rocky ground in the early afternoon. The mare put her left foreleg down wrong on a loose stone and pulled up short, and Caroline felt it through the reins immediately. She stopped the wagon and got down and checked the hoof. She had grown up around horses enough to know what she was doing, and found a stone bruise that was going to take at least 2 days of rest before the mare could work hard ground again. "We need to stop," she said. "There's a canyon shelter about a mile west," Aaron said. "I've camped there before. Flat ground, water source, shade from the afternoon heat. We can rest the horse there." They made it to the canyon shelter, which was better than she expected, a wide, curved rock wall that created a natural windbreak, a spring that ran clean and cold from a crack in the rock, and enough flat ground for both wagons and a comfortable camp. Aaron saw to Blythe with the same focused competence he brought to everything, cleaning the bruised hoof and packing it with what he carried in his medical kit, and the mare seemed to immediately understand that she was being well cared for. 2 days, Caroline said, sitting on a rock with her map spread across her knees. That puts us about 6 days from Santa Fe at current pace. Maybe 5, Aaron said. The ground level's out west of here, easier travel. She looked at the map. Then she looked up at the canyon walls, which in the afternoon light were a deep, layered red, striped with amber and ochre, geology you could read like a book. This is extraordinary, she said. I know, he said, sitting down on a neighboring rock. I've thought about this place a lot since the last time I was through here. What do you think about it? About how permanent it is, he said. These walls have been here for longer than anything we can imagine. All the things humans have been doing to each other and around each other for all of history. These walls just continue being what they are. She looked at him. That's either comforting or disquieting depending on the day, she said. Which is it today, he asked. She thought about it seriously. Comforting, she said. Oddly, he nodded. He understood. That evening in the shelter of the canyon, with the spring running its quiet song through the rock, they talked longer than they had any previous night, about Richmond. About their respective fathers. His had been a farmer, a good quiet man who died of a stroke when Aaron was 17, leaving him and a younger sister with their mother. About books. About what was worth being angry about in the world and what was simply weather, and what was the difference between the two. She told him about the case she had worked on with her father, that she was most proud of, a wrongful property confiscation involving an elderly freed man whose land had been seized under fraudulent paperwork. Her father had won. The man had gotten his land back. You did the research? Aaron asked. I found the precedent that cracked the case, she said. My father argued it, but the key document was something I pulled from a Missouri case file at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. You should be very proud of that, he said. I am, she said, no false modesty. It was something worth being proud of, and she was. The law is a powerful thing when it's used correctly, he said. And a catastrophic thing when it isn't, she said. Which is most of the time for most people. She paused. The Apache families in these territories, the legal framework has been used against them so consistently and so cynically that I understand why they have no faith in it. No faith in it from Washington, he said. But they know when individual people are dealing honestly. That's a distinction they make. He paused. We may encounter some of the Mescalero groups in the next day or two. If we do, I want you to know that the appropriate behavior is exactly what your instincts would probably tell you: straightforward honesty. No condescension, no nervousness. I don't condescend, and I'm not easily nervous, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm telling you your instincts will be correct. She looked at him. Firelight, canyon walls, stars in the narrow strip of sky above the rock, his face in profile looking into the fire, and something in her chest that was past the point of being categorized as mere appreciation or professional respect or even straightforward admiration. Aaron, she said. He turned. His eyes were warm and direct on her face. She had been thinking carefully about what she wanted to say for approximately 3 days, and had repeatedly decided not to say it because she was leaving for Santa Fe, and the logic of speaking was complicated. But something about the canyon walls and their permanent red indifference to human hesitation made her tired of the complicated logic. I think, she said carefully, that you are the most genuinely decent person I have met in a very long time. Coming from you, he said quietly, that is not a small thing. I don't mean it as a small thing, she said. The fire shifted between them. A log settled with a soft sound. I'm aware that I'm heading to Santa Fe, she said. And I want you to know that I am aware of that. I'm aware of it too, he said. The words were slow and careful, as if he was putting them down on ground he wasn't sure of yet. Good, she said. I think we should both be very clear about what the circumstances are. Agreed, he said. And within those circumstances, she said, I think it's worth noting that I have not wanted to arrive somewhere and have a journey be over in quite some time. He was very still. The way a person goes still when they are trying to make sure they have correctly understood something. "Caroline," he said. His voice had dropped to something quieter than conversation. "Yes," she said. "I have been quietly, and I hope not intrusively hoping that Santa Fe has something worth staying for," he said. "And I have not been thinking about Santa Fe when I think that." She looked at him for a long moment. The canyon walls stood around them in their permanent, unhurried red. The spring ran its thin, honest song. "That is not intrusive," she said. "That is the most precisely accurate thing anyone has said to me in years." He reached out and very slowly, very carefully, covered her hand with his where it rested on her knee. His hand was warm and slightly rough and entirely real. She turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, while the fire burned and the stars moved their ancient increments across the canyon's narrow sky, and the mare rested her bruised hoof, and the world continued in its ordinary miraculous way. The next morning, Blythe was improved but not ready, and so they had a second day in the canyon, which neither of them appeared to mind. They used the time well in practical terms, checking and reorganizing supplies, mending a piece of wagon canvas that had begun to fray, treating the mare's hoof again with steady attention. But there were also long stretches of the afternoon where practical tasks were finished, and they sat in the shade of the canyon wall with books. He was reading a volume of Washington Irving. She had brought a collection of Emerson, and occasionally one of them would read a sentence aloud that seemed too good to keep private. She read, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." He thought about it and said, "Not in his goals but in his transitions man is great." She looked up. Irving, he confirmed. "He had a point," she said. "I think so," he said. He was looking at her over the top of his book with an expression she had started to recognize, fond and attentive and not at all trying to hide either quality. "Stop looking at me like that," she said. "Like what?" he asked, with the specific innocence of someone who knows exactly like what. "Like I'm something worth looking at," she said. "You are something worth looking at," he said. "You're also a great many other things worth paying attention to. The looking is only one of the smaller parts of it." She set Emerson face down on her knee and looked at him properly and said, "Aaron Wilcox, you are making it extremely difficult for me to maintain a sensible perspective on my circumstances." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm just being honest." "That's what makes it difficult," she said. He smiled, a full smile this time, not the quiet, contained version but the real one, the one that changed his whole face into something that made her chest do that thing again. And she looked back down at Emerson because she needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't him. On the third day, Blythe was sound. They broke camp in the canyon with a thoroughness that Caroline suspected was influenced by neither of them being in particular hurry, and set out west. On that third day out from the canyon, they encountered the Mescalero Apache group Aaron had mentioned. There were 7 people, 3 men, 2 women, 2 children, camped near a natural water source that the trail passed close by. Aaron slowed Clark and raised one hand in a simple gesture of acknowledgement. One of the men, tall and unhurried in his manner, stood and approached. His name, Aaron had explained to Caroline earlier, was likely one of a group he had traded with before, and when the man came close, Aaron spoke in halting but genuine Spanish, which was the practical trading language in this territory, and the man responded with the patience of someone accustomed to bridging distances. Caroline watched the exchange with a focused attention. It was not tense. There was a directness to the communication on both sides that she recognized as genuine respect between people who had dealt honestly before. Aaron introduced her. She understood enough Spanish for that, and she inclined her head, meeting the man's eyes directly and without performance. The group had a situation. One of the children had a fever, not dangerous yet but rising. The woman with the child was clearly her mother and clearly worried. Aaron looked at Caroline. She had a small medical kit of her own. She also had her father had been specific about trail supplies, a packet of willow bark, which reduced fever, and some chamomile for the child to sleep. She climbed down from the wagon and went to where the child was resting and asked Aaron to translate. She examined the girl, perhaps 4 years old, with enormous dark eyes that watched Caroline with frank curiosity, and found nothing beyond what appeared to be a summer fever, the kind that was common in children and serious mainly if it climbed too high. She explained through Aaron what she was doing, prepared the willow bark tea with water from their supply over the group's fire, and sat with the child while the girl drank it. The mother watched Caroline throughout with an expression that moved slowly from wariness to assessment to something that might have been gratitude, though it was expressed without sentiment, practically, sincerely, one person to another. They stayed 2 hours. Aaron talked with the men, traded some tobacco for dried meat. When they left, the child's fever was already beginning to recede, and the mother gave Caroline a small object, a piece of red stone carved into a simple shape, and said something that Aaron translated as, "She says it's for safe travel." Caroline held it in her palm and looked at it and then looked back at the woman and said, directly and carefully, "Please tell her that the injustice her people face from the government of this country is something I understand, and that her kindness toward a stranger who has benefited from the same systems that have harmed her is something I will not forget." Aaron translated this. The woman looked at Caroline for a long moment. Then she nodded once, a serious, equal nod. When they were back on the trail, Caroline held the red stone in her hand for a while before putting it in her coat pocket. "You handled that beautifully," Aaron said. "I handled it honestly," she said. "Which is all I know how to do." "In this case they were the same thing," he said. She looked over at him on Clark, moving beside her in the amber light of the afternoon, and felt the particular ache of something growing in her chest that she was no longer trying to categorize because it had gotten too large for categories. 4 days from Santa Fe became 3. 3 became 2. The land shifted and changed with every hour. Mesa formations like flat-topped cathedrals, arroyos cutting deep red paths through the earth, juniper and pinon beginning to appear on the hillsides, the altitude making the air thin and clean and slightly intoxicating. On the second-to-last night they camped on a hillside with Santa Fe's distant lights just visible on the horizon, a scattered, small, warm constellation of human habitation against the dark land. Caroline sat with her knees pulled up and looked at it for a long time. "There it is," she said. "There it is," Aaron agreed. "I should feel relieved," she said, "or excited or certain." "And instead," he asked. She looked at him. He was sitting close enough that she could have reached out without stretching. "Instead, I feel like something is about to be finished that I don't want to be finished," she said. She had decided days ago to stop being anything other than entirely honest with him because he was a person who deserved honesty and because anything less felt false in a way she couldn't tolerate. He looked at the distant lights and then back at her. "Caroline," he said, "I want to say something." "Say it," she said. "I left Dusthaven with you because I told you the truth about why, partly because of your situation, partly because of Pete nagging me, and partly because I wanted to know you got somewhere safe." He paused. "But somewhere in the first week of this journey, I stopped thinking about getting you somewhere safe and started thinking about entirely other things. Things that are considerably less simple." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to change your plans," he said. "You have a house and a life in Santa Fe and you've worked very hard to get here, and none of that is something I would interfere with." He paused. I need you to know that when you asked me in Dusthaven what my reasons were, the third reason I gave you was more significant than I admitted." She looked at him steadily. "You said you'd rather know I got where I was going safely than wonder about it after I was gone." "Yes," he said. "Aaron," she said, "I need to tell you something with equal honesty." "Please," he said. "I have been thinking about what comes after Santa Fe since we crossed into New Mexico territory," she said. "And I have not been thinking about it in terms of law clerking." She paused. I have been thinking about it in terms of whether Dusthaven is a reasonable distance from Santa Fe. He was quiet. She watched the expressions move through his face, something careful and guarded giving way to something that was simply open, and in that openness something that filled her chest with a warmth so specific and located that she knew with absolute clarity that she was not going to think herself out of it. "It is a reasonable distance," he said. "It's about 10 days' travel." 10 days, she said. "Maybe 9 with good weather," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her. The distant lights of Santa Fe burned on the horizon between them and the future. "Aaron," she said. "Caroline," he said, in exactly the same tone, careful, thorough, entirely real. "I think," she said, "that I am fairly seriously in love with you." He breathed in, out. The stars above them were motionless in the way stars were motionless, constant, unwavering, older than every human feeling and somehow a perfect backdrop for all of them. "I know I am," he said, "in love with you. I've known since about the 4th day on the trail when you read that Emerson's sentence aloud and then looked at me to see if I understood it." "Did you?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. He reached out, and this time it was not just her hand. It was his hand finding the side of her face, gentle and warm and entirely certain, and she leaned into it as naturally as the mare leaning into a trusted hand. And when he kissed her, it was not tentative. It was a kiss from a man who had been patient and honest and had waited until the words were right, and it was the best kiss Caroline Hurst had ever experienced by a significant margin, which was not a low bar because she had experienced some good kisses in Richmond. When it ended, she kept her face close to his and said, "Well, well," he agreed quietly. "We have logistics to discuss," she said. "We do," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and kissed her again in a way that made tomorrow feel like an entirely reasonable delay. They arrived in Santa Fe on a Wednesday morning in late April of 1878, and it was everything and nothing like what Caroline had imagined, which was exactly how things should be. The town was larger than she had expected, more established, more layered with its Spanish and Native and American histories, more architecturally interesting with its adobe buildings glowing gold and pink in the morning light. The plaza was busy with commerce and movement and the particular energy of a place that had been a crossroads for centuries and knew it. The house on Acequia Lane, which is what the deed said, turned out to be a genuine surprise. It was a modest but solid adobe structure with a walled courtyard and a small garden that had been left untended and was vigorously growing wild things in every direction. There were 4 rooms and a wooden floor in the main room, and a fireplace and a window that looked east toward the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which were still snow-capped and luminous above the town. Caroline stood in the empty main room with the morning light coming through the east window and the mountains visible in the distance and thought, "Yes, this is real. I am here." Aaron stood behind her. He had been quiet since they entered the house, respectfully giving her space to have whatever she needed to have. "It's good," she said. "It's good," he agreed. "The garden is going to take a great deal of work," she said. "Gardens usually do," he said. She turned and looked at him. He was standing in the middle of her future with the same unassuming, real presence he had brought to everything from a cracked wheel on a Texas road to a canyon shelter to a child with a fever in the New Mexico desert. "Stay," she said. "A few days. Help me get it in order." "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. They spent 3 days in Santa Fe, and they were 3 of the most extraordinary days of Caroline's life. They cleaned the house together and bought furniture from a local carpenter, a table, 2 chairs, a bed frame, and stocked the larder from the market and found the woman next door, Senora Vega, who had been watching the house for 2 years, and who immediately assessed Caroline with sharp, approving eyes and then assessed Aaron and smiled in a way that suggested she found the situation both logical and welcome. Aaron hired a man to repair the courtyard wall, which had several missing stones. He did this on the morning of the 2nd day, while Caroline was meeting with a local attorney named Harold Gaines, who turned out to be, within 5 minutes of conversation, genuinely interested in hiring a research clerk who knew what she was doing. She came back to the house with a part-time arrangement in hand, which was real money and real work, and found Aaron in the courtyard directing the wall repair with the quiet competence she had stopped being surprised by. She stood in the courtyard doorway and watched him for a moment. He was in his plain cotton shirt with the dust of the courtyard on his boots, and he was pointing something out to the mason with the focused expression of a man who understood how things fit together. He looked up and saw her. "How was the meeting?" "I have a job," she said. His smile broke open fully. "I knew you would." "You couldn't have known," she said. "You weren't there." "I knew you would," he repeated, simple as gravity. She crossed the courtyard and did what she had been thinking about doing for the better part of the last 3 days, which was putting her arms around him in the afternoon sunlight and holding on, and he held her back with the warm solidity of a man who intended to be exactly where he was. On the evening of the 3rd day, they sat in the courtyard with 2 chairs they had carried out from the main room, and wine that Senora Vega had pressed on them with a knowing expression, and they talked about logistics the way 2 intelligent people who had feelings and also brains could talk about logistics. Dusthaven was 10 days' travel. It was manageable, they both knew, but it was not nothing. "I don't want to lose Dusthaven," Aaron said. "The livery, the ranch, I've built something there, and Pete depends on the work, and the town needs the stable." "I don't want you to lose it," Caroline said, "and I don't want to leave Santa Fe. I have a house and I'm beginning to build work here." "So," he said, "so we need to think practically about this," she said. "I've been thinking practically about nothing else for 3 days," he said. "And I think," he said, "that there are some problems in life that are solvable, and some that require a significant decision." He paused. He was looking at the mountains, which in the evening light were purple and blue and extraordinary. "I've built something good in Dusthaven, and I'm not ashamed of it, but I built it partly because I felt like I was supposed to be there and not anywhere else." He paused again. "That feeling has been changing." Caroline was very still. "I'm not asking you to wait on my building something here," he said. "I'm not asking you to wait for anything. I'm saying that I've been taking the measure of this town for 3 days, and there are horses in Santa Fe that need a good livery stable and land south of the town that could carry a decent herd. And Pete Holloway is 37 years old and could run the Dusthaven operation himself with a part ownership arrangement that would be fair to both of us." She looked at him. He was still looking at the mountains, the way he looked at things when he was making sure he had thought them through. "Are you," she said carefully, "telling me that you're thinking about relocating to Santa Fe?" "I'm telling you that I'm thinking about it seriously," he said. "And that the reason it's serious and not just a thought is you." He turned to look at her then. "But I don't want to make a decision that size based on 3 weeks of travel and a feeling. I want you to know that I see this clearly and I'm not rushing it." She looked at him for a long time. The mountains darkened. The first stars appeared. "Aaron," she said, "we have known each other for 3 weeks, and I am 26 years old, and I have been the most practical person in every room I have ever been in for my entire life." She paused. "I am telling you that I have never been more certain of anything than I am certain of you. And I am also telling you that if you need time to make a decision of this size, then that is what I want you to take, and I will be here when you have taken it." He reached over and took her hand. "6 months," he said. "I need to go back to Dusthaven, sort out the arrangement with Pete, make sure the transition is honest and fair to everyone, and then come back," she said. "And then come back," he said. She looked at their joined hands in the evening light. 6 months was a long time. It was also not very long at all in the scope of things. "You'll write," she said. "As often as you want," he said. "I want letters," she said. "Real letters. Not all is well here, weather is fine, real letters." "You'll get real letters," he said. She turned her hand over in his and held it properly. "Then we have a plan," she said. "We have a plan," he agreed. He left 2 mornings later. Caroline stood in the street outside the house on a Sequoia Lane while he loaded Clark and prepared for the eastward road, and she kept her face composed because she was Caroline Hurst and she did not perform emotions in public. but when he pulled her into a proper embrace, she held on for longer than was probably visible from the street. 10 days eastward, he said against her hair. Make it 9, she said. He kissed her. He touched her face. He got on Clark and headed east, and she stood in the street until the dust had settled and there was nothing more to see. And then she went back into her house and unpacked the last of her trunks with the efficient purpose of a woman who intended to be ready when he came back. The 6 months that followed were the most productive of Caroline Hurst's life, which was saying something. She threw herself into the work with attorney Harold Gaines, with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for this opportunity for years. Gaines was a sharp, fair man who recognized within the first week that his new research clerk was substantially more than he had hired, and within the first month he was bringing her into initial client consultations and asking her opinion on case strategy. He began, slowly and with what Caroline recognized as genuine respect, to treat her less like a clerk and more like a legal mind with a desk in his office. She also made the house on Sequoia Lane into a home. She reclaimed the courtyard garden with the help of Senora Vega, who had opinions about every plant and shared them freely. By midsummer, the courtyard had jasmine climbing the repaired wall and 2 fruit trees that Senora Vega said had been there since before she was born and simply needed someone to care about them. They produced enough apricots in July that Caroline had more preserves than she could eat, and she sent a jar of them eastward with a trusted carrier and a letter that said, "The apricots arrived this summer as promised by Senora Vega, who takes enormous credit for them despite the fact that I did most of the actual watering. The work with Gaines has expanded beyond what I hoped for. I argued my first case strategy at a client meeting last Tuesday. Gaines said it was correct. I told him I was aware of that. He seemed delighted rather than put off, which suggests we will get along well. The mountains are extraordinary in August. I find myself wanting to show you things constantly, which is inconvenient given that you are in Texas. Your last letter made me laugh so hard that Senora Vega came to the wall to ask if something was wrong. Nothing is wrong. Everything is, in fact, very right except for the 10 days between us. Come back when you can." His letters were, as promised, real letters. He wrote about Pete's growing competence and the negotiation of the ownership arrangement, which was proving more legally complex than anticipated, but was proceeding honestly. He wrote about a foal born at the stable with unusual markings that he was calling Midnight for obvious reasons, and about a dispute between 2 neighboring ranchers that he had been asked to help mediate and which had resolved well. He wrote about Richmond. He wrote about missing the canyon and the stars, and the way she had said his name in the dark. She kept every letter in a wooden box on the shelf in the main room between Thoreau and Emerson. In September, a 3rd problem arrived, entirely unexpected, in the form of a legal challenge to the deed on the house. A man named Prescott Ware, who represented a land development company out of Denver, appeared in Harold Gaines' office one afternoon with paperwork claiming that the house on Sequoia Lane had been part of a land grant that had reverted to public domain on a technicality. A technicality that, on close reading, was not a technicality but a fabrication. Caroline spent 4 days in the Territorial Records office and found the fabrication. It was a forged date on a secondary filing, placed there to manufacture a lapse in continuous occupancy that would trigger the reversion clause. She showed it to Gaines with 3 corroborating documents and a quietly satisfied expression. They took it to the territorial court. The judge, a man named Abernathy who Caroline had already assessed as thorough if slow, heard the case with appropriate seriousness. Prescott Ware's attorney presented the forged documentation with professional confidence. Caroline sat beside Gaines and passed him notes that he delivered with the confident authority of a man who knew he had an excellent hand. They won. The deed was confirmed. The development company withdrew, and Prescott Ware left Santa Fe with no more than he'd brought. Afterward, Gaines shook her hand and told her that she had won that case, not him, and that he had a proposition to discuss. She wrote Aaron that night with the particulars. His response arrived 11 days later, and it said, among other things, "I am not surprised. I have never been surprised by anything you have done since I watched you face down 3 armed men on a contested road using the legal argument I had prepared the night before. What I have been is regularly astonished, which is a better thing. Gaines' proposition, take it. Whatever it is, take it. And I will tell you that I am coming back in November, which is 1 month sooner than I planned, because the arrangement with Pete is concluded, and the papers are signed, and I find I have run out of patience with the distance." Caroline read this letter in the courtyard, with the last of the summer jasmine still clinging to the wall and the mountains going early amber in the September light, and felt a warmth so complete and localized in her chest that she sat very still for a moment and let it be what it was without analyzing it. Gaines' proposition was a full junior partnership, formal legal partnership, her name on the office door. He could not let her be called an attorney because the law of the territory was what it was, but within the office she would be a full partner in all but the title that an unjust system refused to grant her. She took it. Aaron arrived on a Thursday in November. She was in the office when Senora Vega sent her grandson running down the street with a message that said simply, "He is here." She set down her pen and told Gaines she needed an hour, and he waved her out with the expression of a man who had understood the situation for some time. He was in the courtyard when she got home. He had let himself in. She had given him the gate key in September because it seemed only practical, and he was standing in the middle of the courtyard garden with the jasmine around him, and the mountains behind the wall and the apricot trees going bare for winter, and he looked exactly like himself, which was the best possible thing he could look like. She walked into the courtyard and he turned and she went directly to him without hesitation, and this time the embrace was the kind that came from months of letters and careful waiting, and it was long and warm and entirely necessary. 9 days, he said. I made it in 9. I know, she said. You wrote from Albuquerque. I wanted you to know I was close, he said. She looked up at him. He looked at her. The November light was thin and gold, and the mountains were purple-gray and very beautiful. I have a junior partnership, she said. I know your letter, he said. I'm incredibly proud of you. I have apricot preserves, she said. I got them, he said. They were excellent. I have, she said, and then stopped and looked at him steadily. I have been waiting to do something for approximately 4 months that I am going to do now. She kissed him. In the courtyard with the jasmine and the apricot trees and the mountains behind the wall and Senora Vega very probably watching from next door, she kissed Aaron Wilcox with the specific intent of a woman who had been practical about everything for her entire life and was choosing in this moment to be nothing but happy. When they separated, his expression was everything she had been carrying in her chest for 4 months given a face. I brought horses, he said, 2 of them. Clark and a young mare I've been training. I thought if you were agreeable I could put them in the stable at the end of the lane. And Aaron, she said, yes. Are you going to live in Santa Fe? Yes, he said. I am. There's a property south of town. A man named Reyes is selling decent land, good water access. I've been corresponding with him since August. You've been planning this since August, she said. Since July, he said. August was when I found Reyes. She stared at him. Then she laughed, a full, genuine laugh, the kind that Senora Vega had asked about in the summer. He laughed too, and it was warm and real, and the garden felt full of something that hadn't been there before he arrived. You quietly fixed everything, she said. I'm good at fixing things quietly, he said. I know, she said. I've known since a cracked water barrel in Dusthaven. He took both her hands in his. His thumb moved across her knuckles in a slow, deliberate motion that was entirely focused and entirely fond. Caroline Hurst, he said, I would very much like to ask you something that requires no particular hurry, but that I have wanted to ask since a canyon in New Mexico with stars and a low fire. Ask it, she said. Will you marry me? He said. Not immediately, not on any particular timeline, but in the honest intention of building something together in this courtyard and in this town and in whatever comes next. She looked at him for a moment. Around them the courtyard was still and golden, and the mountains watched from behind the wall with their ancient, generous indifference. "Yes," she said, "with the full understanding that I am a woman who will always have opinions and will never stop working and will likely argue with you about case strategy at the dinner table." "I'm counting on it," he said. "Then yes," she said, "completely and without reservation." He pulled her close, and she pressed her face into the warm curve of his shoulder, and felt the specific solidity of something real and chosen settling around her like the best kind of foundation. Not a cage, not a constraint, but something to stand on. They were married in the spring of 1879 in the courtyard of the house on Acequia Lane, with Senora Vega as witness and Harold Gaines and his wife Eleanor in attendance, and a circuit preacher named Morrison, who did the ceremony with genuine warmth and a commendably brief sermon. The apricot trees were just beginning to bud. The jasmine was coming back up the wall. The mountains were still white-tipped and luminous and permanent above the town. Caroline wore a blue dress she had made by the local seamstress, and her auburn hair pinned, with a small white flower that Senora Vega had pressed into her hand that morning, with the firm certainty of a woman who would not hear any argument against it. Aaron wore his best shirt and had, for the occasion, cleaned his boots until they shone, which Caroline found extraordinarily touching for reasons she did not try to analyze. When Morrison said the words and they looked at each other in the courtyard morning, it was not a performance. It was just two people being honest about what they had decided, in front of the small community of this city that had become their shared beginning. Aaron bought the Rays property south of town and spent the spring building it into a working enterprise, a small horse ranch, and a livery arrangement that served the south side of Santa Fe's growing population. He was good at it. He was good at everything he tried because he brought the same patient, thorough attention to all of it, and the horses seemed to understand this about him, the way Blythe had understood it from the corner stall in Dusthaven. Caroline's partnership with Gaines continued to expand. By the following year, she was handling a significant portion of their cases, and her name, while not yet on the sign by law, was known in the legal community of Santa Fe as someone you wanted on your side if your case required serious research and rigorous argument. She worked on property disputes and contested deeds, and on several occasions, cases involving the rights of Hispano families whose land had been threatened by the same kind of fraudulent development claims that had come after her own house. She won more than she lost. The red stone from the Mescalero woman sat on the windowsill of the main room where the light caught it in the morning, a daily object of gratitude she could not have entirely articulated and did not try to. By the following summer they were expecting their first child. Aaron received this news on a Tuesday morning in the kitchen of the house on Acequia Lane, when Caroline told him in her direct, clear way that he should probably know there was going to be a third person in the house by January, and his expression was something she was fairly sure she would spend the rest of her life being glad she had seen. A boy arrived in January of 1881, in the middle of a cold Santa Fe night with Senora Vega as capable and unflappable assistants. They named him James, after Caroline's father, with Aaron's family surname and the weight of both families in it. He had Aaron's dark hair and Caroline's gray-green eyes, and an extremely strong opinion about everything from the first days of his life, which both parents found entirely reasonable. Senora Vega looked at the baby with the authoritative assessment of a woman who had seen many babies and said, "This one will be trouble," in a tone that made it clear she meant it as the highest compliment. The courtyard in spring, when James was 4 months old and could be carried out into the sun in the afternoons, became Caroline's favorite place in the world. The apricot trees were fruiting again. The jasmine was climbing toward the top of the wall. The mountains were clear and vast and permanent to the east. Aaron would come in from the south property at midday and find her there, the baby in her arms and a case file on her knee, and he would sit beside her in the second chair and tell her about the horses, and she would tell him about the case, and James would observe both of them with the focused gray-green eyes that suggested he was taking notes. In the evenings sometimes they read aloud to each other. Thoreau, Emerson, Irving, and eventually Twain, whose work had begun to arrive in bookshops, and who had very particular views about the West that made both of them laugh and occasionally argue, which was one of their favorite activities. 2 years after James was born, a daughter arrived. They named her Ruth for Aaron's mother. She had Caroline's auburn hair and Aaron's warm directness, and from the beginning she seemed to understand exactly what she wanted, which was everything, as soon as possible. The house on Sequoia Lane, which had been 4 rooms and a courtyard, and a garden when Caroline arrived with a cracked wagon wheel and 3 days' worth of plans, became something else entirely over those years. It became the kind of place that accumulated warmth the way good houses do, in the worn spot on the kitchen table where papers were always spread, in the hooks by the door where small coats were added over the years, in the smell of the kitchen on Sunday mornings, when Aaron made breakfast with the same patient competence he brought to every practical task, in the courtyard where Senora Vega came and went as she pleased and treated the garden as a collaborative venture, in the windowsill where the red stone sat in the morning light. Harold Gaines retired in 1884 and did, in the end, put Caroline's name on the sign, Hurst Gaines Legal Practice, and then simply Wilcox Legal after she bought the practice fully from him the following year with Aaron's full and enthusiastic support. She was not a licensed attorney by the territory's law, but she was the closest thing to one in practice, and everyone who needed real legal help in Santa Fe knew where to go. She argued before judges who initially regarded her with skepticism, and left the courtroom with the particular expression of men who had been thoroughly out-argued and were struggling to determine how to feel about it. Aaron's South property grew. Not dramatically. He wasn't interested in dramatic growth, which Caroline had always appreciated. He added horses steadily, developed a reputation for training horses with unusual temperaments, and occasionally took on what he called problem horses that other people had given up on, which was a pattern Caroline teased him about regularly given its obvious metaphorical dimension. He built a small bunkhouse for the one hand he employed, a young man named Lewis who was 17 when he started and 25 when he became a full partner in the operation, because Aaron did business the way he did everything else, fairly, and with attention to the people involved. Pete Holloway ran the Dusthaven livery with the same solidity he had always shown, and he and Aaron corresponded regularly, and the Dusthaven operation continued to do well, which Aaron tracked with the satisfaction of someone who had built something good and managed to leave it in good hands. One evening in the autumn of 1886, when James was 5 and Ruth was 2, and the house was full of the particular warm chaos of a family with children, Caroline and Aaron sat in the courtyard after the children were in bed. The air had the cool edge of October, and the stars above the wall were overwhelming and clear. She had a glass of wine. He had his. The apricot trees were done for the season, bare-branched and resting. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" she said. "Tell me," he said. "That wheel," she said, "in Dusthaven on the road in." He looked at her. "You told me once that it was catastrophic luck." "It was," she said. "It was exactly that. Catastrophic, and the most important thing that ever happened to me." She paused. "You know, I have thought about the fact that you fixed that water barrel without telling me, and the survey papers, and Blythe's hoof, and the wall in the courtyard, and probably 17 other things I never found out about, and I have thought about whether any of it would have let me leave sooner if you hadn't." He was quiet. "The water barrel would have failed south of the Picos," she said. "In the heat. That could have been genuinely dangerous." "Yes," he said honestly. "And the trail guides you quietly assessed before pointing me toward the right one," she said. "I knew you hadn't pointed me to the first two by accident. You knew they were wrong before I asked around." He looked at her with the careful openness she had loved since a stable yard in Dusthaven. "I didn't want you to be in a position where you felt you had to settle for a bad option because the good one hadn't appeared yet." "Aaron," she said. "Yes." "Were you," she said, with the precise, careful tone she used when she was asking a question she genuinely needed to know the answer to, "fixing things to keep me in Dusthaven longer?" He thought about it for a long moment. The way he always thought about real questions. "No," he said. "Not consciously. I was fixing things because they needed fixing, and because I was in a position to fix them, and because—" he paused. "Because I would have done exactly the same things for any person who needed them. The fact that I hoped you'd stay was separate from the doing of them." He paused again. "But I would be lying if I told you that the water barrel didn't occur to me to check specifically because the idea of you disappearing into the desert toward Santa Fe was one of the more alarming thoughts I had ever had." She looked at him for a long time. "I believe you," she said. "Both parts of it." "Good," he said. "Because I have seen you fix things for Louis and for Senora Vega's roof, and for the Ray's boy who brings the deliveries, and for every problem horse in New Mexico," she said. "You fix things because things need fixing. It's simply who you are." "Yes," he said. "But you also," she said, "checked that water barrel because of me." "Yes," he said. "Both things are true at once." She reached over and took his hand the way she had in a canyon in New Mexico under a narrow sky of stars and held it in the same way. "I'm glad you did," she said. "All of it. I am glad of every fixed thing and every quietly arranged circumstance and every slow, deliberate choice you made on that journey, because all of it brought me to this courtyard and this life and these children asleep inside and you, right here." He turned his hand over and held hers back. "I'm glad too," he said. "Every day." Above them, the October stars were the same stars that had been over the Texas plains and the canyon and the hillside above Santa Fe on the night she had told him she didn't want the journey to be over. The same stars that had been over everything, patient and permanent and indifferent to human timing, while two people from the same city in Virginia found their way to each other in the middle of the wide, extraordinary West. Senora Vega came through the gate the next morning, as she came most mornings, with something from her kitchen and a running commentary on the state of the jasmine. James climbed out of bed and immediately found his way to Aaron's side in the stable yard, which was where he spent every morning he was allowed to, learning the horses the way Aaron had learned them, with patience and attention, and a particular quality of stillness. Ruth sat in the kitchen with Caroline and Caroline's case files, and absorbed everything she saw with her auburn hair and her alert dark eyes, which were beginning to look less like either parent and more entirely like herself. The mountains to the east were touched with the first snow of the season, white above the amber and gold of the autumn slopes, and the light came through the east window of the main room and hit the red stone on the windowsill and turned it a deep, warm, living color. And everything was settled and complete and known, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the kind of life that a wheel breaking on a dusty road could secretly, catastrophically, perfectly produce. If the person who came to help was exactly the right one.